Good morning. Welcome to Peggy's Place. I'm Leanne Lindsay, your host today, and that beautiful piano music is from our guest today, Eric Allaman, and we are going to introduce him in just a moment. I wanted to let you know that you can also watch this show live on YouTube today. We are in the studio together, and we're going to be showing several videos that are music videos and other types of videos that you might want to see. And you can also listen in, of course, anywhere you have internet in the world at kgua.org, and just click on Listen Live at the top of the page. You'll see the Air Pocket app that you can save to any of your devices. And then you can also, of course, listen to us on 88.3 FM along the coast here in Mendocino and Sonoma counties, known as the Mendonoma Coast, all the way almost over to Healdsburg. We've got listenership of about 50,000 people on air, and then we've got, of course, everybody online. And before we get into today's show, it is Friday, December the 16th. It's also his birthday, by the way. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But it is chilly outside. Oh my goodness. It was like 32 degrees when I came in this morning. It's saying about 33 outside on our temperature indoors, but I think according to the weather app, it's showing about 40 degrees. We've got some rain coming up on Monday, but this weekend looks like it's going to be a beautiful weekend. And we've got several events that are happening. The Dolphin Gallery is featuring Ling Yin Jones Jewelry and Scott Sheffro Photography. That's going to be through the end of the year. And at Gualala Arts on this Saturday, December the 17th at 2 o'clock. It is the holiday concert, and coming back after a long hiatus during the pandemic, it is the Ernest Bloch Bell Ringers, and it's a community favorite. It will certainly get you into the holiday spirit. Tickets are available at Gualala Arts, the Dolphin Gallery, and online at eventbrite.com. Ages 7 through 17 will be admitted for free. And then on Wednesday, December the 21st at 4 o'clock, the award-winning violinist David McCarroll returns to the to the Art Center as part of the Chamber Music Series. And McCarroll performs regularly in major concert halls, including Berlin, Vienna, Amsterdam, and Carnegie Hall in New York. He was born in Santa Rosa, right over the hill, and grew up at Star Cross Monastery right here in Annapolis. And recent performances have included Stravinsky's Violin Concerto in Berlin. And speaking of Berlin, as I was mentioning, in the studio with us today is an international composer and pianist, Eric Allaman, who has lived in Berlin and now lives in the Sea Ranch. He was born in Springfield, Missouri, grew up in places like Chicago, Seattle, Southern California, and Paris. And he lived in West Berlin during the Cold War. His career has spanned across film, television, theater, and ballet, and his scores have been performed and recorded in orchestras in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Berlin, Belgrade, Prague, and North Macedonia. And some of his film credits include Ridley Scott, Tom Cruise, John Voight. These are where he has scored for all these motion pictures, and Shia LaBeouf and Sam Shepard, Anne Hesh, Kirsten Dunst, John Montaigne, Stacy Keach, Martin Sheen. It's just a long list, and we're going to get into these TV, theater, and ballet credits in just a second. Let's first welcome Eric Allaman to KGUA. Good morning.
Good morning, Lee. Thank you.
We need to get your mic on.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me now?
We can hear
Thank
you
you very
now.
much. It's wonderful to be here.
It's a
This cool
pleasure
crisp
having.
December morning.
Yes, and you didn't slip on that slippery
No, I was
walkway.
glad I didn't.
Well, I tell you, Eric, why don't you give us a little idea of kind of the early years and what got you, walking down this path in the first place?
Well, my grandmother was a pianist in Norway, and we were living in Springfield, Missouri at the time, and And we had I believe, just recently moved to Chicago, and she bought us a piano, and she said the boys should learn to start to play the piano. And I've always said it's a dangerous thing to buy your children a musical instrument because it can take over your life. And sure enough, I started playing the piano, and I felt an emotional attraction to it right away. What really interested me was, I remember just the first or second year, I had this one John Schumann book, and it would always have a picture of like Telemann or Bach or Pachelbel, and then there would be a little piece below them. And I'd look at these guys with this long hair and wigs, and I learned to play these pieces, and I would feel the sentiment that they captured, 300 years ago. As a little kid, I was so touched. I can't believe that these people put in the notes on a paper, something that I could play, 300 years later, and I felt the sadness or the joy or melancholy or nostalgia. And it was a profound impact on me. And it kind of became my addiction to music, was that art of encapsulating a sentiment or an emotion forever for people to experience around the world in different languages. And so that's sort of how I began. I started at 7, and I played the piano till about 14. And by that time we lived in Southern California. And at this point, girls and surfing were a lot more important than music. And plus I was kind of a closet pianist. I didn't want anybody to know I played the piano because it was much cooler at that time to play the guitar. And so I started playing guitar about 15, 16. But then at about 16, 17, I returned to the piano. My father was railroading me into medicine, and everything was about, when you're a doctor, it's going to be great when you're a doctor, you'll have a boat, an airplane, and
Right.
but then in my second year in college, actually at the end of my first, I auditioned for the School of Music at UCLA. I had gone to UCI on pre-med scholarship, and then I just decided I was going to follow my dreams and not dad's. And so I auditioned for the School of Music. I moved up to UCLA, and that's where I studied film and theater and music. And that sort of really propelled me into the music industry. And my mother being Norwegian, I had been exposed to Europe, a lot of traveling there through the years. And I had, on one trip, I'd come back through Paris, and that made a profound impact on me. And I thought, I've got to live there. A lot of my heroes came from Europe as far as musical influences. And so I moved to Paris in 83, and then I eventually wound up in West Berlin, like you said, where I eventually got into film music.
And you were working with Tangerine Dream?
Yes. What it was, when I first got to Berlin, keep in mind, I didn't know anybody when I moved to Paris. You realize we're only as wealthy as we are with our contacts in life, and I didn't know one person in Paris.
And you'd studied French for what, a year?
I had studied French for 1 year, which was just enough to get over there and be confused about everything that I heard. So after shy of a year, I moved to Berlin. Of course, I didn't know one word of German, and I didn't know any Germans at all in Berlin. But I went on this one trip, and I had some luck within the first week. I actually got my music on a radio station. I got a publishing deal with a publishing house, and I played on television all within about 5 or 6 days.
Wow.
And I thought, and then one night I went to a restaurant, asked if I could play the piano, and they said, we'll give you a job. And so I thought, wow, things are happening here that were not happening in Paris. So I decided to stay, and eventually got a manager, and he introduced me to Christoph Franke and Edgar Froese, which were the guys who created Tangerine Dream. And I had known them because they had done Thief, and Risky Business had just been finished. And so I started working with them and did music for a film called Vision Quest with Matthew Modine, and then Firestarter, which was with Drew Barrymore. But the big one was really Ridley Scott, because he was doing Legend at the time with Tom Cruise. And when I went in the studio, I thought, I recognize that guy. He was in Risky Business, and he was, he was only about my age at the time. And so we worked on that. I wrote the song that John Anderson of Yes sang for the theme song for the movie. And at that point, I had a German partner, and we rescored the old silent film Battleship Potemkin, which was a big communist propaganda film that was having its 60th anniversary at the Berlin Film Festival.
60th.
It had been done it had premiered in I think the spring of 1926 in Berlin. And so we rescored it, because it was a silent film, gave it a completely new electronic feel. And from the impact of that and Legend, all of a sudden I had these offers coming in from Los Angeles, and I had watched Tangerine Dream. All their work mostly came from Hollywood. And so here the irony was that my fantasy to live in Europe and finally getting some traction was boomeranging. It was going to take me back to Los Angeles. And so I had a
Hmm.
friend who had written a film, and he was working with a young director named David Fincher, who's gone on to have a huge career. And they wanted me to score a film called Body Hunter. And so I came back to LA and began my career in film there.
How did you transition from film to TV?
Well, I've always said that your career in Hollywood as an artist is a little bit like when you pick up a dandelion stem and you blow on the seeds and they just sort of go off in every possible direction. It's very hard to navigate a career in Hollywood because you don't really have so much control. I've learned, I worked in Hollywood for over 30 years, and there's often no rhyme or reason why you get any one job. And then of course you've got to hope that recent job you had takes off. And so I had already done about 5 or 6 films. And then there was this organization that was completely oblivious to called the WGA, which is the Writers Guild. And they went on
Right.
strike in 1988. And I was like one of those kids down at the beach in Phuket picking up starfish, not realizing a tidal wave was coming in. And this strike hit. And all of a sudden I didn't work for 2 years. And I
wow.
was naive enough. I didn't know how to navigate that time. And so 2 years went by, and my films were 2, 3 years old. It was like, that was like dirty laundry. It was nothing
Right.
fresh and new. And a friend of mine, Kevin O'Donnell, got me a job scoring an animated series. And I began in cartoons, which in entertainment is kind of the bottom of the industry, because and that's not to disrespect it. It's so labor intensive and hard, but it's very exploited, and it's very tough, hard work that doesn't often pay the best. But I began doing animation shows like Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century, and Super Duper Sumos, and Stunt Dogs, and Mutant League, and then Liberty's Kids was a big show on public television. And then I segued into TV. I got 30-minute TV shows and hour dramas, and then I started scoring films again. But so what I'm getting at is, my
Stepping
career kind of,
stones,
it
took a
kind of,
little,
that's, I had to go
right.
where the checks were coming from, and the
Right.
opportunities. And that's sort of how my career went into that way. And I wound up doing films too, but television became more of where I worked.
I heard it was over 600 episodes that you
Yes,
scored
I did.
for?
I did a
My
lot of
goodness.
television. Let me tell you, it is a burnout because
Yeah.
I did, for example, over 120 episodes of Extreme Makeover Home Edition, which was a big hit for ABC.
Oh, it was, yeah.
From 2003 to 2010. And then I did Duck Dynasty. And
Oh, Duck Dynasty.
I did, but like, to give you an idea of what you go through as a composer, Mike Hammer was a show that was popular in the 90s with Stacy Keach. It was called Mike Hammer Private Eye. And I had to score I had to write about 35 minutes of music every week. And I would meet with Stacy on Fridays on set because he wanted to be involved in spotting the music. That means where you determine where the music's going to be in the film, what type of music and how long it'll be. And then on Saturday, I'd have to start writing my motifs for the villain or the love theme or whatever, or variations of Harlem Nocturne that I was doing. And then I would compose for the next few days. By Wednesday, I would be printing the music. Thursday, the musicians would come in. That night we would mix it, a runner would pick it up, and very often it was broadcasting that Sunday night. Can you imagine? It was that tight.
Very.
And then the next day I would be doing the next episode. And in those days, you always had 26 episodes, was a full, that was basically an order for a network, and there was never a day off. And I mean, that is just a burn.
I remember in one of your interviews, I think it was BMI London, where you were talking about at that festival how writing and composing for TV is so different from doing your own structure. I mean, the structure of it is different in a way.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to be layered with people talking over the music. And
Extreme Makeover Home Edition is a good example of that, because it was, that's reality television. It was nonstop talking, right? Yet they wanted music to be nonstop in the background. Well, you can't really start writing music that's melodically developed that takes somebody who's going to listen to the melody, because the melody would get in the way of the dialogue.
Mhm.
So you had to write music that was basically textured, that sort of augmented the sadness of a family that needed the new house, or the joy of the new house being revealed, or Ty Pennington when he would be talking up a storm about this or that.
Mhm.
You had to sort of fit into the background,
that tempo,
and add sort of tempo and excitement or emotional elements to the show, but not get in the way. So you got it. It's called background music for a reason, you know.
Right. If you're just tuning in, you are listening to international composer and pianist Eric Allaman, who has lived in a variety of cities here in the US and in Europe, Paris and Berlin. He now lives here in the Sea Ranch. It is his birthday today, so everybody wish him a good birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And I'm Leanne Lindsay, host today on Peggy's Place. This is KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. We are streaming around the world at kgua.org. You just click listen live at the top of the page to tune in anytime during the day, 24 hours a day, 24/7. And then we are also on 88.3 FM, which is aired here along the coast of Mendocino coast, beautiful Northern California. And Eric, I want to go back into the music itself, like some of your recent music. I'd love to play for those that are watching on YouTube, because we are live on YouTube right now, and anybody can watch this later, so you don't have to check in right now. But if you want to watch it, we're going to play one of his pieces right now that was actually recorded here on this coast. And which one did we want to start with first,
I think that one
Eric?
right there. Yeah, the first one there.
What we whispered
Together at Twilight.
together
Yeah.
at twilight. Give us a little idea of what went into this composition.
Okay,
First.
this is from a piano solo album that I just released on October 1st. These are all a bunch of piano solos that I wrote during COVID. You know, we were all locked up for a couple of years, and this piece is called Together at Twilight. My good friend Paul Cazal helped me film this. My good friend Wendy and Gordon Van Dyke, they allowed us to play it at their beautiful house in Elk. And then we filmed it at Coffey's Cove. And it was sort of a tribute to my parents. They've both passed on. My mother died last year. My father died a few years ago. And it just, it covers that sentiment of continuing to honor and pay tribute and in a way keep in your life still those who have passed on. So I wrote this as sort of an experience of what that's like to remember those that were a big part of our life at one point that are no more. So,
and we're going to play that right now. And I'm going to share this on screen. Such beautiful music, Eric. I'm going to stop it there, but you can watch the rest on YouTube. You can also go to Eric's website, ericallaman.com, all A's, Allaman. And just beautiful, beautifully written and performed music.
thank you.
It's just amazing, Eric.
Thank you so much. It's very sweet of you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Paul and I have shot about 8 videos that have we've released, and all featuring this spectacular area that we all call home.
Oh, I recognize that. If you get a chance to watch it, that was Cuffy's Cove up in Elk, and some of the coastline there is the Elk coastline.
Yeah, which is so stunning.
And of course, it was shot in Wendy Van Dyke's home
Yes.
and on her piano. And speaking of ballet, you know, that's another thing that he's scored music for, ballets. And she was a ballerina with the San Francisco Ballet.
I know. And that was something that was so fun when we first met her. And I really hit it off with Wendy. We're kindred spirits. We both have a profound love of ballet. And of course, she was a star ballerina at the San Francisco Ballet. And
Right.
I was the resident composer for the Thousand Oaks Performing Arts Center, which was a much smaller company, but I had done 3 ballets there with Kim Maselli, who ran the Pacific Festival Ballet, and the first one was the Sea Princess, and then Noah's Ark, and then Camelot. And
Sea Princess.
yes, that was the Sea Prince was one that was a little bit more, you know. What I've noticed in ballet is what's hurt ballet, in my opinion, is that there's the lack of storytelling. And Tchaikovsky and Petipal really hit it out of the park when they started to do their operas in the late 19th century, because the Nutcracker and Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty, they're story based. It's like watching a movie. You're watching a story that is dance acted. And as ballet progressed in the 20th century, it became more a choreographer's medium, which was to show off virtuosity and dancing. And so it became less entertainment for the common masses. And I think it became more of a niche for, you know, dancers and people who really appreciated high-end dancing. And our goal was to create family-based stories to hopefully bring families back into the theater to watch the shows. And so these shows that we did are really dance acted, and you really sit on the edge of your seat following the progression of the drama throughout the show.
Well, I know the Nutcracker was always one of my favorites to go to every year when I lived in the Bay Area for a couple of decades. Every year, and I take my son.
To show you how important that show is, that the Nutcracker is usually responsible for about 70% of the annual budget of every dance company in America.
Seriously.
Can you imagine how important one show is?
Right.
That's usually the money show for all dance companies. And when they do new ballets or some of the other ones, they're not as attended as well. And so they lose money often on those other shows. But the Nutcracker, that's why you see it everywhere, because it's the one that is guaranteed to bring people in.
It tells such a story, just like you were saying.
It's those melodies from Tchaikovsky are just unbelievable. It's the greatest assortment of melodic. He was such a melodic genius, and it's such a stunning piece of work.
One of my favorites to listen to is Tchaikovsky.
Yeah. Oh, I loved him since I was a child. And Swan Lake is actually my favorite of his ballets. It's not so laden with great melody after great melody like Nutcracker is, but it does have that really beautiful theme for the Swan. And it's scored a little bit more like a movie where it's constantly developing, where if the Nutcracker is lots of short little pieces. And so, but I love those shows, and I love dance, and I love that art form.
So we talked about Sea Princess. What were a couple of the others that you mentioned?
Noah's Ark was my second show.
Noah's Ark, right.
And we based this just on the drama of the Old Testament story of Noah and his wife and his children. And it wasn't intended to be per se a religious show. It's just that the story was epic and lended itself to dance. And so we created the show. It premiered in 2010 at the Thousand Oaks Performing Arts Center, and we had a lot of interest in this to take it on the wall, on the road. We had Pat Boone had seen it, and he thought, we've got to get this thing on the road. And then we had met.
How did you meet up with Pat Boone?
There was a bunch of, Richard Carpenter, Pat Boone. There was a lot of celebrities that came to the Thousand Oaks Performing Arts Center. It's right across the hill from Malibu, and then you have Calabasas and Agoura right there. So you had a lot of people that would show up, and we just had so much interest in this show, and we thought we were going to take it out on a tour, but it became very tough. This production, I mean, if you can imagine, had over 150 dancers in it.
150.
Yeah, it was gigantic. It had to be scaled down to, I think we got it down to 22 or something. to try to take it on the road. And that's still a very costly show to take out on the road. Unfortunately, it never saw the light of day as a tour because there's not a mechanism for touring shows in America for dance. And I kept using, Michael Flatley as an example with his Irish shows that were so successful, but we could not find the right producer director to take it on the show, even though it really resonated with children up to grandparents. And it's had 3 other productions at the Thousand Oaks Performing Arts Center, but unfortunately, it's never gone anywhere else outside of that theater.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, if you are on YouTube or you watch YouTube later, or you can just go and look for it yourself, I'm going to play just part of a 5-minute piece, not all of it, but this is Noah's Ark promo video, and we're going to get that started right now. This is KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. I'm Leanne Lindsay, and this is Eric Allaman. So much drama on stage. My goodness, the music moves this along, and ballet describes some of what we've been watching, Eric.
Well, this is the promo for the show. And basically the show opens up where there is a premonition that something tragic is going to happen on Earth. And then there's this big opening piece. And then we cut to Noah in the vineyards. He's tending to his grapes and he's with his wife and his sons. And then all of a sudden he is approached by an angel who starts to speak to him. And then before you know it, he's talking to God, who is telling him what he needs to do, which is to build this ark and to take 2 of every animal and basically prepare for this massive tempest that's going to hit the planet. And of course, everybody thinks he's a fool when this is what he's telling everybody that he's going to do. And he becomes the subject of ridicule with the village people, but he eventually builds this ark. And then the animals magically start to show up 2 by 2, and he puts them all on the ark. We have one of the sons, Japheth, meets a girl named Lydia. So we added a little love story. In ballet, you have to have the love angle. So we had one of the boys that falls in love with a girl, and she's able to come on the ark with him at the last second. So the first act ends with the storm and the destruction of the planet, and then the ark sailing off. The second act opens up with life on the ark, and at first everything is really peachy keen and great. Everybody's getting along, but then eventually the animals start not getting along and the days are going by. And, I think it's 3 times that Noah sends the dove out to see if it can come across land, and things break down. We had brought an element where we even had unicorns on this show, and 2 of the boys, Ham and Japheth, fight at one point. And in the middle of this fight, Ham accidentally kills one of the unicorns, which of course we know means extinction if one of the sexes was killed. And so it's a very emotional moment. And Noah starts drinking, and the last second, the dove comes back on the 3rd flight and has a twig in its beak. And of course it has found land, and the show they find land, and then the ark opens up and all these animals, it's this huge exodus of all these animals out of the ark, and it's really a beautiful, glorious ending. And so it's really and children just loved it. It was just with all the various animals.
I could see how that'd be well received here in San Francisco and
Yeah, it's
other Northern California
it's
venues.
I've been, it's a tough thing to find out how to market ballets.
Yeah.
It's not like straight plays and musicals, and I have found that you can't find very many people that are in that business of marketing dance. It's a pity, because dance needs new shows and it needs new stars.
It sure does. And I could see how some of the perhaps the churches in Northern California might get behind that.
That's why
But
Pat Boone was interested.
oh,
He
I
he,
can
he
see.
loved the
Yep,
he loved the religious
I
angle
can
of
see
this, and he
that.
was going to pull in Haim Saban, who was Israeli, and because he thought Judaic Christian
Right.
background of the story, Old Testament, and like I said, we thought we were going to go. It never happened, but we've had 3 massive productions that have done very, very well in Thousand Oaks.
Let's switch gears for just a moment and talk about this media property that you've got that you are so excited about. And it's a part of the media project would be an animated feature. And then describe what else it could be and give the audience an idea of what it's called and how you got started with it and what you're trying
Okay,
to do.
this is a show called Wake Up, and they give you just a little tagline what it's about. It's about a little girl named Hope who has an accident in her bathroom. She's knocked unconscious, and she comes to in a dystopian wasteland in the future, and she hears this voice say, "Hope, wake up, Hope." And she looks up, and she sees a smartphone talking to her. And he goes, "My name's Chip. I'm your defense attorney, and we've got to get to court." She says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "You're the last human on Earth, and you've been charged with killing the planet, destroying the environment." And she says, "I'm 12 years old. What do you mean?" And he goes, "We've got to get going. We're late." So this begins this
I
journey
love
where
it.
Chip takes Hope through this desert wasteland, and they come across Woody, the last tree on Earth. And he sings about how humans exploited him. He never understood all the good things trees did for humans. They come across the last drop of water, Wawa, on the planet. And they get to court, and through the process of the various witnesses, Sonny the sun testifies against Hope.
Sonny the sun.
Phytoplankton is an Irish phytoplankton. They generate most of the oxygen on Earth. He
Yes, they do.
testifies, and nobody paid attention to me, even though I was the bottom of the food chain. And we wrote this to really inform, inspire, and motivate the youngest generation, 6 to 9-year-olds, that our generations have failed them with what we've done with the environment. And they need to hit the ground running, and they've got to try to figure out, we need young, brilliant people to figure out this mess we've created. It's the greatest threat we all face right now is climate change. And still it falls to the back burner in people's concerns. They think about the environment, or they think about inflation or the economy or the war in Ukraine or COVID. But this is something that is escalating at an exponential rate now. So we wrote this to, like I said, motivate the youngest generation. It's extremely funny. It's very humorous, and yet there's quite a bit to learn when you listen to the show, but it's not preachy. And we've already licensed it to Germany to be done as a staged musical. It's been translated into German, and we're waiting right now. We have an offer, hopefully, that it'll get a home in Vienna, at the Staatsoper in Vienna. We're waiting to see still. And then there's another director who wants to take it into a big theater in Munich. In America, because you mentioned it's, if you go to the website wakeupthemusical.com, you can also find it on my website, ericallaman.com, on the theater link. We have written this as a 90-minute animated movie too. And since everything is so big in streaming these days, we actually even wrote it into an episodic, which is 4 25-minute episodes of the story of Hope and this experience of her learning, even as a little child, her actions have implications on the environment. And that's what she realizes. She's just not innocently, she has also got skin in the game here of causing problems with the planet. So it's we're currently looking for a director, producer, and a network or studio to produce the film or the episodic television as we're developing as a musical in Germany. So it's a project that's very, very important to me because we
both have kids.
we have kids, and what do you do with your life? It's important to make contributions that are significant. I was watching Nancy Pelosi's special last night at HBO, and I was blown away by how much the woman has done and how involved her life is, and the fights that she did for the Affordable Care Act, and of course in trying to get Obama as a strengthened leader, and then basically to impeach Trump, and then of course the whole January 6th thing that happened. And it's important, I think, that all of us contribute, and the environment is a great way to get involved. But I think it's the thing that for most people seems so overwhelming that they
True.
just think, what can I do?
Right.
And
there are steps that people can take that are doable. It's not.
absolutely.
And I remember when we did the Ocean Life Symposium with Scott and Tree Mercer, and several guests would come on and talk about these are ways that we can help, with entanglements with the whales. We can have ropeless gear, and with plastics, here's how we can help. And with protection of the whales, there was a fellow from the International Monetary Fund who we were wondering, well, what's he going to be here for? And he talked about legal protection for the whales, because whales can produce so much for our planet in creating oxygen, because they're feeding those phytoplanktons that you were talking about earlier in Noah's Ark. So there are things that can be done. It's just sometimes people do feel overwhelmed. And this animated feature, I wanted to also now share another piece here. Now, this one, is this one of the episodes that you were talking about?
You're gonna play this song right now?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a song when
It's a song in an episode.
When Hope meets meets Chip, the smartphone who is going to escort her to the courtroom. As they're walking across the desert, they see a burned out tree that is barely alive, and his name is Woody. And so they come upon him and they start talking to him. And so this song will, as you play it, you'll see what happens.
All right. We're going to play this song now. It says, "There ain't nothing more good-natured than a tree."
You couldn't hear the breeze if it weren't for our leaves. And the birds won't have no place to build a nest. Little kids won't learn to climb. Your rum and coke won't have no lime. What are you gonna lean on when you rest? There ain't nothing more good-natured than a tree.
Oh, that is a lot of fun. You can find that again on YouTube, and you can go to wakeupthemusical.com or Eric Allaman. And I'm going to stop sharing. We are streaming on YouTube right now. And so just go to KGUA's YouTube channel and you will find it. And you can also hear us online at kgua.org and also at 88.3 FM. This will repeat at 1 o'clock. I'm your host today, Leanne Lindsay, and we have the international composer and pianist and creator, I can say, and top of everything else, Eric Allaman, who lives right here in the Sea Ranch now, after all the different places you've lived in. And why don't you give us a little idea? What we listened to just then was Wake Up the Musical, one of the songs.
Right.
And I want to hear a little bit more about where you hope to take this. And you said theater and animation. And then I'd like to actually get into talking about your family,
Okay.
since we're talking about children.
Well, with Wake Up, as I said, right now it's being developed as a stage musical in German. It's been translated into German, and we hope to have word about possibly 2 productions shortly. So that would be done as a staged musical in Europe. Now, in America and in the West, what we want to do is develop this as an animated project. We have developed it to either be a 90-minute movie where we've written the full script, and then or as an episodic, because all the streaming platforms now are preferring multiple viewings. And so we have 4 25-minute episodes of Wake Up as an episodic. And I just feel it's education is a very important part of dealing with the environment and awareness. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, this show is very positive and it's very, very funny, but it does give you sort of a sense of, God, I want to get involved. And that was our motivation, to get children involved. The other older generations have failed this youngest generation in the mess we're leaving them with. So it's to inspire them and let them know you've got to get involved too. So that's what I hope to achieve with Wake Up. So as I said, we're looking for a network or studio or a producer director to help us realize this project.
I would love to see these shorts played at film festivals as well.
We'd love to do the tour of that too. If we did I would love to make the tour of the film festivals. I had an experience going to film festivals or films that I've scored, and there's so much fun.
Absolutely.
First of all, and it's a great way to meet the international community and to expose storytelling. I mean, that's, all drama is storytelling. And so we're telling the story of our planet and a little girl and what the planet means to this little girl.
So speaking of children, tell us about your children and where they're living. And you've got a wife here at the Sea Ranch.
My wife's name is Elizabeth Hadrian Clune, and she's this gorgeous Irish lass that comes from Arklow, south of Dublin. And I met her about 20 years ago in Malibu. We were both living in Malibu at the time. And she has 3 children, Anya, Justin, and Connor. And then I have 2 children, Von Essex and Tristan Leigh, for my 2 boys. And like the typical American families, the kids are all scattered all over the place. And both my boys are coming up a week from today, actually. So I'm thrilled to see them. And Vaughn is in cybersecurity down at Dana Point, and Tristan is studying to become a programmer in Santa Cruz. So it's going to be wonderful to see them for the holidays.
Yeah, I bet.
And, it's funny because we moved up here, and for young people, it's not a whole lot to do when you come up here. It's
as a lot of the new families have learned that have moved in.
Yeah, it's a little tough, I think, for young people who need, stimulus and motivation. And so,
but they're finding some ways. I know that
they are. We go surfing, or we'll play golf, or we take hikes and such. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
And
December
Christina at the
month.
Lodge is also creating a lot of things for children.
Yes, it's wonderful that we have the Lodge now.
Older adults too. I don't know, how old are your children?
29 and 23.
Okay, so they're older, much older. And what were you starting to say about? I just cut you off, and I wish I had followed what you were saying.
Oh, I don't know if I'll remember what I was saying either.
But it sounds like you've got like the Brady Bunch going on.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a Brady Bunch situation. Because now Elizabeth's children are even older than my children. And so everybody's, forging their own path in this crazy, ever-changing world, and so we're happy to be up here, though. And I mean,
are they all coming in?
No, just my 2.
Just your
this
2.
year. Every time it's different. Not everybody can get away with everybody's schedules.
And what prompted you guys to buy up here? I mean, where were you living before you moved?
We were in Malibu for 27 years. And I'll tell you, Los Angeles, a lot of the people in this area are, of course, from the Bay Area or Davis and Sacramento. But when we moved up here, we combed the whole coast. We drove 500 miles of the coastline looking for a place to live, because in Malibu, we live in constant fear of fires. It's I've read where it's considered the most fire-prone place in the United States because of the way the Santa Monica Mountains run east to west, and they're full of chaparral that is intended to burn, and the Santa Ana's blow from from east to west. And so we lived right across from Zuma Beach. People who know Malibu, that's the big beach in Malibu. And there's one of the canyons is called Canyon Doom, and it hadn't burned since the late 70s. And I had a hankering that thing is gonna go up. And we had noticed, we used to go to the Dorothy Chandler to see operas or take the kids to Dodger Stadium. But in Malibu, this was basically about 2.5 to 3 hours to do this, to go 35 miles of what you would fight in traffic. And Los Angeles is fantastic and wonderful with everything it offers and the diversity, but the congestion is so punishing that it makes it tough to enjoy what the city offers. And so
no kidding,
with pollution and congestion and that ever-growing traffic and then climate change, you can't believe how much warmer it's getting. I grew up in Dana Point, and as I would tell people, in the summers, when you went out as a kid, you'd have to wear a sweatshirt because living on the beach, it was cool in the evenings, and usually that overcast coastal fog would come in, and you'd have to wear a sweatshirt in the evenings in the summer. Now the houses need air conditioning. Nobody had air conditioning back then on the coasts. So
People here are surprised that I put in air conditioning in my house, but it is warmer during the summers than it was before. And I've been coming up here since the 70s. So,
well, when I talk to the old timers here, the one thing I hear is it used to be 9 months of rain and fog and overcast and 3 months of sun and beautiful weather. And of course, now everybody's saying it feels it's more like it's 6 and 6, because the one thing that I've been astounded by, and Elizabeth too, is we wake up, it seems so often that every day starts off sunny with not a cloud in the sky. And that's like Southern California. And so and a lot of the people who've been here 20 plus 30 years tell me that they have noticed climate change in this area. One of the facts that I remember reading that was astounding to me, that they said by 2070, Portland will have a climate like Los Angeles, and that Los Angeles will have a climate like Cabo San Lucas.
well, they've
So this dry
certainly
out
have
is
a
moving
lot of hot
north.
days during the summer.
Yeah, and it makes sense that this area is drying out slowly but surely, and we can't control the weather patterns, at least not technologically yet. We haven't figured that one out.
Well, I want to go back to what you said about Malibu, being in Malibu. What was it? One of your agents or someone had said, if you move out of LA to Malibu, you're going to hurt your career.
Yeah, this was in 90. I had been living in West Hollywood, and in 91, I decided to move back to the beach and Malibu. And
you're a surfer too.
Yes, and I love surfing. And Malibu, is due people. What's strange about the coastline, Malibu is actually due west of Los Angeles, and so you drive, Malibu is about 27 miles long, and then you drive into Santa Monica, and then you finally hit the 10 and you can go across into Los Angeles. And I had decided I wanted to move out of West Hollywood. I wanted to get back to the beach. I couldn't take the congestion. This is in 91. Portable phones had just come out, and my agent says, that's insane. If you move out to Malibu, you're going to absolutely impact your career in a negative sense. I said, I'm moving 20 miles west, and you're telling me that's going to kill my career? I must not have much of a career. It's going to kill my career. And but it seemed like a big psychological move at the time. But FedEx had recently come out, so I realized I could get I could get my music delivered to the studios for the mixes through FedEx, and I was able to. I used to do all my production at 4th Street Recording, which was the old Beach Boys studio at Wilshire and 4th Street in Santa Monica. Then I eventually built a studio in Malibu where I did all my production. But, when we moved up here in 2018, we could not have moved up here 2 years earlier, because until they had the high-speed internet, I couldn't have come here.
And the internet was just coming out in the 90s. I remember I was in the tech industry, and we saw the whole thing unfold and how it impacted everything. And you were recording, weren't you recording on reel-to-reel tape at some point?
That's an interesting thing, because I have seen the complete technological escalation of development of recording, because when I first started in Germany, we delivered our music on 1/4-inch tape, which is a very, very thin tape that ran at what they call 15 IPS, 15 inches per second. And then, of course, those were analog systems. Noise was always your enemy in those days when you recorded. So eventually you were able to record the tape at 30 IPS. It moved twice as fast. Thereby, you would have a lower noise ratio on your recording. Well, shortly after that, we started delivering on 1/2-inch tape, which was just, you mixed your music to a stereo 1 and 2. You had track 3 for one overdub track for your film score, and then you had 60 cycle tone on the 4th track to synchronize to film, because your delivered music has to synchronize with the film that you intended it.
Right.
Then the DAT machines came out, the digital audio tapes, and Fosix had developed one that had SMPTE on it, a center stripe where you could synchronize to it. So then I would deliver TV shows.
SMT.
So DAT.
Yes.
Digital audio tapes.
But you were saying SMPTE.
SMPTE.
Yes.
Which was the international code for synchronizing to film, which was the sort of a pulses on a recording that you could synchronize film with. And I think it's the acronym is Society of Motion Pictures, Television, and whatever, SMPTE, SMPTE.
I remember.
But from the 1/2-inch tapes, there came the Fostex, the DATs that had a center stripe for to synchronize. But then people wanted in post, they wanted more control of all the tracks. They don't necessarily want just your stereo files. They might say the brass is too loud. Well, they needed the brass separate then, so you could turn down the brass. So then the ADAT came out, which was the audio digital tape that had 8 tracks. And then simultaneously, Roland came out with the DA88, which was another kind of 8-track tape. And I delivered tons of shows on those. And then eventually Pro Tools, which was a software, became the default method of delivering finalized music for film and television, and which is what most records are made on. And those are studios that live within your computer, basically.
A lot of people who do voiceover production use Pro Tools.
Yeah.
And I remember the fellow who had hired me at the radio station I worked in Aspen. It was an album-oriented rock station. And it was back in the 70s and 80s that I worked at this station there. And he later did voiceover production, but back at the radio station, we created a lot of our commercials on the same, 1/4-inch tape back then.
Yes.
And it was reel to reel. And
you cut the tape with a razor blade.
Tape with a razor blade, right?
You edited it. Yes, right. I know.
And so come full forward today, what are you using to?
I use Logic, which is owned by Apple, and it's a very popular software. It's the equivalent of like Pro Tools in a way, but there's Digital Performer was another very successful software that was for composers. There's Cubase, and those would be pretty much the main ones right now. But Logic is the one that's made by Apple, and you buy it for $199, and it's just such a powerful tool. It's great for songwriters. It's great for composers. It's great for anybody that works in audio, because you can synchronize to film so easily. You come with extensive, I think it's 40 gigs of sounds that come with it, and there's a drum machine within it that is in real time. You have an orchestral library that comes with it. Wow. It's very, very, very easy. I found it a lot easier to work with than Pro Tools. They all do the same thing, but it's a little bit more geared toward the writer, where Pro Tools was more for the engineer to record music.
I got to thinking about some of the music we used to play back then, and it was Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. And you made a comment once, something about Led Zeppelin and the Beatles.
Well, I loved Led Zeppelin. That was my band. I wanted to be Jimmy Page. That's why I started playing guitar. I bought a Les Paul because I wanted to be Jimmy Page. And
I wanted to be Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yes.
I bought a guitar like his.
Unfortunately, I played piano, which that's why I was a closet pianist for so long, because I thought I was doing the uncool instrument. And but I love that era of music, and of course both those bands were so influential for me growing up.
They had
the Beatles,
orchestral in Led Zeppelin quite a bit.
Yes, and of course so did the Beatles. Because,
they did too, of course.
Their producer was classically trained and very competent as a arranger, and that's why if you think like Eleanor Rigby, Paul McCartney had heard the Four Seasons by Vivaldi, said I want to do arrangements sort of like that, and so George Martin immediately cooked up this arrangement with strings for Eleanor Rigby, and they started to incorporate classical elements into some of their songs.
I think I saw that on that documentary that's just been released like a year ago about their recording studio days.
Yeah. Yes. There's been a couple of that are out.
Yeah.
One on Hulu and another one that Peter Jackson did. Yes.
Well, in these last few moments, and we've got about another 6 minutes here on the show, I'd like to go back and play another one of your music videos that were so beautifully recorded, a lot of them with Paul Kozel, our local photographer. He's got Studio 391
right, Cypress Village,
right here in the Cypress Village, Studio 391. Hi, Paul, if you're going to be listening. And so when did you do these and what time frame?
Paul and I started filming these in August, actually. And there's one that's worth playing called Rendezvous. It's filmed up at the Lighthouse in Point Arena.
That one.
And it's at the very top. Yeah, that one. And Paul knew the guy who runs the place up there, and we went up one day and we bumped into him and
Mark,
can we shoot there? And this was in the middle of August, and it was totally overcast and foggy, and there was nobody up there. So we filmed this whole video, had complete run of the lighthouse. It was fantastic.
We're going to now take a look at this I'm going to switch back and do a share screen. We're using Zoom right now to go to YouTube. And so that those that are watching on YouTube or either now or later can see this. And you are listening to KGUA in Wallala 88.3 FM. I'm your host today, Leanne Lindsay, and this is a fabulous composer and pianist with me, Eric Allaman. And this was filmed in the Lighthouse, Point Arena.
It's called Rendezvous.
You know, Eric, as I'm listening to this, there are a number of words that come to mind, evocative, longing, seeking, searching, kind of that considering the possibilities.
That's really interesting. That seems to plague me with most of my compositions, those adjectives. Yeah.
And even I thought of coming to, being at peace with oneself.
Mm-hmm.
In some of your music.
Aren't we all striving to do that?
Aren't we?
Yes.
And having balance in our lives. But anybody listening here, go to his website, ericallaman.com. You'll see all of the music videos there. You'll see music from theater, from ballet, from so many different places, and even an animation. You've got such a repertoire of across so many genres.
They could also go to my YouTube channel at eAllaman100 or just Google Eric Allaman. You'll come across all those sites. Yes. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, Lee, that when I set out to go to Paris at the beginning of the story, I was just writing piano solos like this, and I really didn't know how I was going to make a living. I mean, what kid at 22 is, goes halfway around the world writing 19th century piano music? You got to be out of your gourd, right? And then eventually I wound up in film music, and then in cartoons, and then TV, and then eventually films again, and stage and ballet. That's why I use that metaphor of the dandelion seed. You just never know where the wind takes your career, and you have to sort of rise to the call. You have to be flexible. You have to be able to go with the flow and be able to compose in a myriad of styles and mediums to survive. And the young people are facing that issue today in music. It's a tough racket, and it's not getting easier. So you have to be very, very flexible and bring a lot of different talents to the table. That's what I've always encouraged. I lectured at Pepperdine for 5 years, and I'd always tell my students, be very well versed in the softwares, orchestrate, copy, compose, bring a lot of offers to the table that you can offer an older composer, so they'll hire you and hopefully get your foot in the door that way. So it's the key.
And on that note, we are going to say thank you to Eric Allaman for joining us today on Peggy's Place. We were at the top of the hour already.
Thank you, Lee. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed having you. It is 10 o'clock and time now for us to say goodbye to